Ryan Thorne's weathered hands trembled as he set his coffee mug down on the den's oak side table. 40 years of marriage had taught him to recognize his wife's handwriting anywhere, which is why the letter from Giselle's dying father felt wrong from the moment he'd opened it. The evening light filtered through lace curtains, catching on the unfamiliar signature at the bottom of the page. His chest tightened as memories of Giselle's recent behavior flashed through his mind. Hushed phone calls, unexplained absences, passwords suddenly changed on accounts they'd shared for decades. "Can't be," he whispered, voice cracking as the first tear fell. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence, marking another moment in which his world seemed to unravel. At 65, Ryan had believed some things were certain: his retirement plans, his marriage, the legacy they'd built together. Now, staring at evidence of what appeared to be an elaborate deception involving a $500,000 inheritance, everything he thought he knew was thrown into question. Have you ever had that moment when something just doesn't add up? When the foundation you've built your life upon suddenly feels like shifting sand? If Ryan's story feels familiar, stay with me as we follow his journey from heartbreak to a truth more complex than he could have imagined. Sometimes, what looks like betrayal on the surface masks something far more profound underneath. Ryan Thorne's weathered hands trembled as he set his coffee mug down on the den's oak side table. The evening light filtered through lace curtains, casting long shadows across the room where he'd spent 20 years helping grandkids with science projects. Something about the letter that had arrived that morning hadn't sat right with him all day. 65 years had taught him to trust his instincts. He reached for the envelope, fingers grazing the paper's edge. The return address belonged to Giselle's father's estate attorney, but the letterhead seemed off. "Can't be right," he muttered, voice thick with doubt. The floorboards creaked beneath him as he shifted in his armchair, the same chair where he'd held each grandchild as babies. The familiar scent of coffee mingled with the faint lavender Giselle always kept in small sachets around the house. In 38 years of marriage, he'd never questioned her intentions. His eyes scanned the document again, widening as they caught on a phrase about contingent inheritance disbursement. A memory flashed. Giselle on the phone last week, voice hushed, abruptly ending the call when he entered the room. "Not her," he whispered, but his voice cracked halfway through. A photograph on the mantel caught his eye. Their 35th anniversary party, surrounded by family, Giselle's smile radiant as she clutched his arm. The first sob came suddenly, hitching in his throat. He pressed a hand to his chest where an ache had begun to bloom. Tears blurred his vision as he stared at the inheritance details, funds he'd never known existed, instructions about accessing accounts he'd never heard mentioned in decades of shared life. Ryan's head shook slowly, denial fighting against mounting evidence. After a lifetime building their savings together, after he'd worked 60-hour weeks at the firm to ensure they'd be comfortable in retirement, after all their plans for leaving something meaningful to their grandchildren. Had it all been calculated? The clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence, each sound marking another moment his world was unraveling. A tear dropped onto the paper, smearing ink on the signature line. Through the wetness, he noticed something peculiar. The signature didn't match the ones he'd seen on their joint tax returns for decades. Memories of Giselle's recent behavior crowded his mind. The frequent lunch meetings with old friends he'd never met, the new password on her phone, the casual mentions of how well her father's investments had performed. "Thought we were building something together, darlin'," he whispered to the empty room, the endearment now burning his tongue. Ryan's fingers gently touched their wedding photo, tracing the outline of younger faces full of promise. Another sob escaped him, this one deeper, from a place where his dignity had taken root long ago. He wiped his eyes with his handkerchief, squinting now at the smudged ink. 40 years as an account manager had taught him to spot inconsistencies in documentation. Something wasn't adding up, and despite the pain crushing his chest, a spark of suspicion ignited. The sound of knocking at the front door startled him. He hesitated, wondering who could be visiting at this hour, an ally or someone else in on whatever was happening. Ryan folded the letter carefully, slipped it into his pocket, and rose unsteadily to his feet. The tears had stopped, but the hollow feeling remained as he stepped toward the door. Ryan's steps faltered as he moved toward the door. The knock came again, more insistent this time. He tucked the letter deeper into his pocket and quickly wiped his face with his sleeve, erasing evidence of tears. It was Marge Henderson from next door, garden shears in hand. "Evening, Ryan. Thought I'd return these before I forget again." Her smile faded as she caught sight of his reddened eyes. "You all right?" "Just fine," he replied, voice steadier than he felt. "Bit of dust in the air is all." His lip trembled slightly, betraying the lie. Marge hesitated, concern etching deeper lines into her weathered face. "Well, if you need anything." "Appreciate it," Ryan nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The shears felt cold and heavy in his palm. After she left, Ryan leaned against the closed door. The house felt emptier now, the silence heavier. The distant ticking of the grandfather clock echoed through the hallway like a countdown to something he couldn't name. His hand reached for the phone. He needed to talk to someone, needed to make sense of what he'd found. His finger hovered over his daughter Lisa's number, then moved instead to Thomas, his old colleague from the firm. Thomas had retired 2 years before Ryan, but still kept his hand in financial consulting. The line rang 4 times before Thomas answered, his voice warm with surprise. "Ryan, been too long, old friend." "Thomas." Ryan's voice caught. He cleared his throat. "Got a question about some paperwork that's come my way." "Shoot." Ryan moved back to his armchair, sinking into its familiar embrace. Outside, dusk had deepened into early evening, casting the den in murky shadows. He switched on the table lamp, its soft glow catching the brass photo frames on the side table. "It's about signature verification," Ryan said, keeping his explanation vague. "If someone's forged a name on legal documents—" He couldn't finish the thought. Silence stretched between them. Then Thomas spoke, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. "That's serious business, Ryan. What's happened?" A memory surfaced. Giselle and Thomas at last year's Christmas party, heads bent together in conversation, both looking up sharply when Ryan approached. At the time, it had seemed innocent. "Maybe nothing," Ryan said, suddenly uncertain. "Just something odd about some estate paperwork." Thomas's response came too quickly. "I'm sure it's just a clerical error. Lawyers make mistakes all the time." Ryan's free hand gripped the arm of his chair. Thomas hadn't asked which estate or whose signature. The knot in his stomach tightened. "Probably right," Ryan said, forcing lightness into his voice. "Sorry to bother you." After hanging up, Ryan stared at the financial records he kept in the drawer beside his chair. 38 years of shared finances, and suddenly he wondered if he knew anything at all. He pulled out last month's bank statement, eyes catching on a withdrawal he didn't recognize. The second wave of tears came silently as he opened the locked drawer where he kept their most important documents. His fingers trembled as they sifted through the papers, looking for something. anything that might disprove what he was beginning to suspect. A folded note slipped from between their wills. Unfamiliar handwriting. A meeting time. Tomorrow's date. Ryan's tears dried as something hardened inside him. Evening shadows stretched longer across the garden as Ryan stepped outside, the folded note burning in his pocket like a hot coal. The air held the first hint of autumn, crisp, with undertones of earth and fallen leaves. He settled onto the worn wooden bench where he and Giselle had spent countless evenings watching the sunset, planning their future. Tonight, he sat alone, the space beside him a hollow reminder of what he now questioned. 38 years, he whispered to the gathering darkness. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, thinner, older. The bench creaked as he shifted his weight, pulling out the note he'd found. In the fading light, he read it again. Meeting confirmed. 2 p.m. Discuss final transfer before Jay returns. Bring documents. No signature, no explanation. Just 12 words that threatened to unravel nearly 4 decades of what he'd believed was a partnership built on trust. Ryan's mind raced back through recent months. Giselle's unexplained absences, her father's declining health, the conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, the strange calls she took in the garden just beyond where he now sat. A sob caught in his throat, but he swallowed it down. The initial shock was hardening into something else, determination. From the neighbor's yard came the sound of children laughing. The Petersons' grandkids visited every Wednesday. Ryan and Giselle had often talked about how their own grandchildren would someday play in this very garden. They'd even selected the spot for the tire swing they would hang together. His hands trembled as he folded the note and returned it to his pocket. The retirement they'd planned, traveling to see the grandkids, volunteering at the community center, taking that cruise to Alaska. Was it all just his fantasy? Had Giselle been waiting for something else entirely? Not possible, he murmured. But even as the words left his lips, pieces were falling into place. Her father's estate was substantial. She'd mentioned investments, properties Ryan had never seen documentation for. The roses Giselle had planted along the garden fence released their fragrance into the evening air, sweet and familiar. She'd tended them every spring for 30 years. Would someone planning deception invest so much care in something so permanent? Ryan rubbed his eyes, which stung with exhaustion and held back tears. In the firm, he'd developed a reputation for spotting discrepancies others missed. Sharp-eyed Thorn, they'd called him. That attention to detail had earned him promotions, respect. Now he would turn that same scrutiny to his own life. He pulled out his phone and opened the calendar app. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., Giselle had entered lunch with Margaret. Margaret, her college roommate, who had supposedly moved to Arizona 15 years ago. Another inconsistency. The distant church bells chimed 8 times. Giselle would be home soon from her book club. Ryan stood, knees protesting after sitting too long in the cooling air. He needed to be inside, composed when she arrived. Needed to watch her face, listen to her voice, search for clues he might have missed all these years. As he turned toward the house, movement caught his eye. A shadow slipping between trees at the edge of their property, too large for a neighborhood cat, too deliberate for the wind. "Hello?" he called, voice steadier than he expected. Silence answered him. Then the rustle of leaves as whoever had been there, disappeared into the growing darkness. Ryan stood frozen, heart hammering against his ribs. First the letter, then the note, now this. The coincidences were mounting too high to ignore. He glanced back at the house. their home filled with memories and moments he'd believed were shared truths. Through the kitchen window, he could see the light he'd left on, welcoming and warm. But for the first time in 38 years, he hesitated before stepping toward it. "Who's there?" he whispered, but only the evening breeze responded, carrying with it the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne. Morning light filtered through the small, round window of the attic, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Ryan had waited until Giselle left for her hair appointment, a standing Friday commitment for the past 20 years, before climbing the pull-down stairs to the space above their bedroom. In 40 years of marriage, he'd never had reason to search through her things. The thought turned his stomach, but the sleepless night had hardened his resolve. 3 inconsistencies couldn't be coincidence. The letter with the mismatched signature, the cryptic note about a transfer, and the lurking figure in their garden. The attic floorboards creaked under his weight. Temperature extremes had warped the wood over decades, creating uneven ridges that forced Ryan to step carefully. The familiar smell of cedar chests and old paper filled his nostrils, mingled with the mustiness that came from limited ventilation. "Where would you hide something, Giselle?" he whispered, his voice swallowed by the insulation and forgotten belongings that surrounded him. Ryan moved toward the far corner where Giselle kept her personal mementos, yearbooks, family photos, predating their marriage, keepsakes from her childhood. A trunk with tarnished brass fittings sat beneath a faded quilt. He'd helped her carry it up here 35 years ago, but had never seen its contents. His hands trembled as he lifted the quilt. Dust billowed up, making him cough. The trunk's lock was simple, a basic latch that had long ago lost its key. Ryan hesitated only a moment before working it open with practiced fingers. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper, lay photo albums, letters tied with faded ribbon, and a small wooden box he didn't recognize. The box was newer than the other items, its wood still carrying a faint sheen. No dust, recently handled. Ryan's heart pounded as he lifted it from the trunk. Unlike everything else in the attic, this held no memories for him. It belonged exclusively to the Giselle he was beginning to fear he didn't know. The box opened easily, revealing a stack of documents and a small leather notebook. On top lay a bank statement from an institution he'd never heard of. Coastal Heritage Trust. The account holder, Giselle Thorne. The balance, $423,500. God Almighty, he breathed, fingers suddenly numb. Their entire retirement savings, carefully built over decades of shared sacrifice, amounted to just over $850,000. And here was an account with half that amount, hidden from him completely. Ryan flipped through more statements. The account had been opened 15 years ago, with regular deposits ranging from $5,000 to $20,000. Money that had never appeared in their joint finances. Money he couldn't account for. The leather notebook contained dates and initials alongside dollar amounts. The most recent entry, dated just last week, FD, $50,000. Final. Transfer complete by month end. A photo slipped from between the pages. Giselle smiling beside a man Ryan didn't recognize. Their posture suggested intimacy. The man's arm draped casually around her shoulders. They stood in front of a beach house Ryan had never seen. "No," he choked out, the single word echoing in the attic's stillness. His vision blurred as tears welled up. One splashed onto the photograph, creating a dark stain on the stranger's face. Ryan's shoulders shook as the first heaving sob escaped him. He clutched the box of evidence to his chest, decades of trust crumbling like the dust that coated his fingers. The pain was physical, a crushing weight that made it difficult to breathe. "All these years," he gasped between sobs. All these goddamn years. A memory surfaced. Their 20th anniversary, when they'd sat on the porch swing discussing their future. Giselle had taken his hand, looked him in the eye, and said, "Everything I have is yours, Ryan. Everything we build together." The rage came suddenly, replacing grief with a heat that surged through his veins. Ryan grabbed the bank statements and ripped them in half, then quarters, then smaller still, until his fingers ached and paper fragments littered the attic floor. "Liar!" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the rafters. "Liar!" The outburst left him breathless. He slumped against the trunk, chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the attic's chill. Through the small window, he could see the oak tree they'd planted the year they moved in. Its branches now stretched higher than the roofline, its roots deep and established, just like he'd thought their marriage was. When his breathing steadied, Ryan carefully gathered the torn papers and the notebook. He took the photo of Giselle and the stranger, along with documents showing the account details. Whatever game she was playing, whatever scheme she'd been orchestrating, he needed to understand its scope. As he prepared to descend the attic stairs, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Thomas's name flashed on the screen. Thomas, who'd reacted so strangely to his questions about forged signatures. Ryan declined the call, then noticed a text that had come through earlier. "Need to talk. Not on the phone. Meet me at the old office. 1 p.m. Important." The flickering light bulb above cast harsh shadows across the attic as Ryan stood frozen, evidence clutched in one hand, phone in the other. Who could he trust now? Thomas had been his friend for 30 years, but that strange reaction. A creak from somewhere in the house below made him start. He checked his watch. Only 10:30. Giselle wasn't due home for hours. "Who's there?" he called, hating the quaver in his voice. Silence answered him. Then another creak, closer to the attic stairs. Ryan quickly tucked the evidence into his shirt, heart hammering against the damning papers. Someone was in his house. Someone who shouldn't be there. And somehow he knew that whoever it was had come for exactly what he now held against his chest. The bench beneath Ryan felt cold and unyielding, much like the reality he now faced. After fleeing his own home, slipping out the back door while unfamiliar footsteps searched the first floor, he'd driven aimlessly, eventually finding himself at Lakeside Park, where he and Giselle had walked every Sunday for 20 years. Now he sat alone, clutching a manila envelope containing the evidence of betrayal. The torn bank statements, the leather notebook with its cryptic entries, the photograph of his wife with a stranger. A light drizzle had begun, dampening the shoulders of his jacket and beating on the envelope. He barely noticed. Nearby, a mother pushed a child on a swing, their laughter carrying across the empty expanse of grass. Once, he and Giselle had discussed having grandchildren they would bring to this very park. Had any of it been real? Ryan hadn't gone to meet Thomas, couldn't risk it after what he'd found. Instead, he'd texted a brief excuse about a doctor's appointment, buying time to think. Thomas had responded with uncharacteristic urgency. "Call me when you're done." Critical. The phone in Ryan's pocket felt heavy, like a brick weighing him down. He pulled it out, scrolling through his contacts. Who could he trust? Their friends were mutual. Their family. Ryan paused on his daughter Lisa's number. How much did she know? Was she part of whatever Giselle had been planning? The thought brought fresh tears, hot against his cold cheeks. He couldn't bear the idea that his own child might be complicit. "Excuse me, sir. Are you all right?" Ryan looked up to find an elderly woman standing before him, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. She held an umbrella that she tilted slightly to cover him. "I'm fine," he managed, the words thick in his throat. "You don't look fine," she said gently. "My husband used to make that same face when he said he was fine. Usually meant his world was falling apart." A sob escaped before Ryan could stop it. He pressed his fist against his mouth, shoulders shaking with the effort to contain his grief. The woman sat beside him, keeping the umbrella over them both. She didn't speak, just offered a clean handkerchief from her purse. "40 years, Ryan finally said, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain on the umbrella. 40 years, and I never knew." "Marriage?" she asked simply. Ryan nodded. "Mine was 43 years, she said. "Good years, mostly. But not without secrets." Ryan looked at her, really seeing her for the first time. Her eyes held a wisdom born of experience, perhaps of pain, not unlike his own. "How do you know when it's over?" he asked. "When there's nothing left to save." She considered this, her gaze drifting to the playground where the mother was now helping her child zip up a raincoat. "I think," she said slowly, "when the pain of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving." The simplicity of her answer broke something in Ryan. He bent forward, elbows on knees, and wept openly. The envelope slipped from his fingers, landing in a puddle at his feet. "Oh!" The woman reached for it, but it was too late. Water seeped through the paper, bleeding the ink on the documents inside. "The evidence!" Ryan gasped, fumbling to retrieve the envelope. But as he opened it, he saw that the damage was done. The bank statements were smeared beyond recognition. The photograph had become a watercolor blur of faces and background. Only the leather notebook, protected somewhat by its cover, remained partially legible. Ryan stared at the ruined evidence, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. Without these documents, how could he prove what Giselle had done? Who would believe him? A 65-year-old man claiming his wife of 40 years had been living a double life. "Maybe it's a sign," the woman said softly. "A sign of what?" Ryan's voice cracked. "That perhaps there's more to the story than what's on those papers." Ryan shook his head. "You don't understand. She's been hiding money, meeting someone behind my back, planning something." He couldn't bring himself to finish. The woman's hand rested briefly on his arm. "I won't pretend to know your situation, but in my experience, the truth is rarely as simple as it first appears." The rain intensified, drumming against the umbrella. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a summer storm moving in quickly. "I should go," the woman said, standing. "And you should get somewhere dry." She hesitated. "Is there someone you can call? Somewhere safe you can go?" Ryan thought of his sister in Cleveland. They hadn't spoken in months, but she had always been his confidant before Giselle, before everything. "Yes," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. The woman nodded, seemingly satisfied. Sometimes the hardest storms clear the air the most. She turned to go, then paused. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can live with. At our age, regret is a heavy companion." Ryan watched her walk away, her umbrella a bright spot of blue against the gray landscape. When she was gone, he looked down at the soggy envelope in his hands. The evidence was ruined, but the truth remained. Somewhere. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Giselle's face filled the screen. The photo he'd taken on their last anniversary, her smile radiant as she blew out candles. 38 years together, captured in a single frame. Ryan's thumb hovered over the answer button. What would he say to her? How could he begin to unravel 40 years of what he now saw as deception? The call went to voicemail. Seconds later, A text appeared. "Where are you? Someone broke in. The attic is a mess. I'm scared. Please come home." Ryan stared at the message, raindrops falling on the screen and distorting the words. Was this another manipulation? Or was Giselle truly frightened? A memory surfaced. Giselle at their daughter's college graduation, tears streaming down her face as she squeezed Ryan's hand and whispered, "We did it together." The pride in her eyes that day had seemed genuine, the love tangible. Had it all been a performance? Ryan's tears mingled with the rain on his face. The soggy envelope fell from his numb fingers into the puddle at his feet. In that moment, sitting alone on a park bench in the pouring rain, Ryan Thorne felt the foundations of his life, his identity, crumble completely. Betrayal hit hard. Share your pain, like for strength, follow for hope. Can he rebuild trust? Thunder cracked overhead as Ryan bent to retrieve the envelope. The leather notebook had fallen open to a page he hadn't seen before. Though water-damaged, one line remained clear. R must never know about the trust. Would break his heart after everything with Lisa. Ryan frowned. Lisa? What did their daughter have to do with this? His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Giselle calling. It was Thomas. The smell of furniture polish and old paper hit Ryan as he stepped into Thomas's office. Despite the firm having moved to sleek downtown headquarters years ago, Thomas had kept this small space in the original building, for consulting, he'd claimed. Now Ryan wondered what other purposes it might have served. Thomas stood by the window, silhouetted against afternoon light. He turned as the door closed, relief washing over his lined face. "Thank God," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Ryan remained by the door, the water-damaged notebook clutched in his pocket. He'd left the rest of the evidence in his car, unsure how much to reveal. "You said it was critical." Thomas gestured to a worn leather chair, the same one Ryan had sat in countless times during their working years. "You look terrible." "Sit." "I'll stand." Ryan's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that usually characterized their interactions. "What's so urgent, Thomas?" The older man sighed, moving to his desk. His hand trembled slightly as he opened a drawer and withdrew a file folder. "I got a call from Coastal Heritage Trust yesterday. They were concerned about some transaction requests." Ryan's heart pounded. The same bank from Giselle's statements. "And why would they call you?" "Because I helped set up the account." Thomas met Ryan's gaze directly. 15 years ago, when Giselle came to me." The confirmation struck Ryan like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the doorframe, suddenly grateful he hadn't sat down. If he had, he might not have found the strength to stand again. "You knew," he whispered. "All this time, you knew she was hiding money from me." Thomas placed the folder on his desk. "It's not what you think, Ryan." "Then what is it?" Ryan's voice rose, decades of friendship cracking under the weight of betrayal. "Because what I think is that my wife has been squirreling away money for years, meeting with some man I've never met, planning to leave me now that her father's dying and there's an inheritance coming." "Inheritance?" Thomas looked genuinely confused. "What inheritance?" Ryan pulled out his phone, brought up a photo he'd taken of the letter, the one that had started all this. This letter about her father's estate, about contingent disbursement. Thomas took the phone, squinting at the screen. His confusion shifted to something darker. "Where did you get this?" "It came in the mail." "Ryan," Thomas said slowly, "Harold Winters died 10 years ago." The room seemed to tilt. Ryan grasped the back of the chair, lowering himself into it as his legs threatened to give way. That's not possible. Giselle has been visiting him in the care facility every Thursday for the past 3 years. No. Thomas slid the folder across the desk. She's been visiting Lisa. Ryan stared at him, uncomprehending. Lisa lives in Chicago with her husband, and Lisa hasn't lived in Chicago for nearly 4 years. Thomas's voice was gentle now, the kind of tone used for delivering devastating news. After the accident, when she lost Mark and the baby, she had a breakdown. She's been at Willowbrook Rehabilitation Center. Thursday is Giselle's day to visit. The words hit Ryan like hammer blows. Lisa's husband dead, their unborn grandchild gone, his daughter in a rehabilitation center? That's not... We just got a Christmas card from them last year. Photos from their trip to Spain. Thomas's eyes filled with sadness. Giselle sent those cards, Ryan. She's been trying to protect you ever since your heart attack 4 years ago. The doctor said another major shock could kill you. Ryan's hand went instinctively to his chest, to the scar hidden beneath his shirt. The memory of waking in the hospital, Giselle's terrified face above him, the doctor's stern warnings about stress and emotional upheaval. But the money, Ryan insisted, clutching at the one piece that still didn't fit, the secret account, the man in the photo. Thomas opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a trust document. The Coastal Heritage account was set up for Lisa's care. Long-term rehabilitation isn't covered by insurance after a certain point. The man in the photo is Dr. Feldman, Lisa's psychiatrist. Giselle has been working with him to establish a permanent trust for Lisa's ongoing care. Ryan stared at the document, remembering the notation in the notebook. FD. $50,000. Final. Transfer complete by month end. FD. Feldman. The final payment into Lisa's trust. The money, Ryan said, his voice barely audible. Where did it come from? We don't have that kind of cash. Thomas hesitated. Giselle sold her family's property in Virginia, the land her father left her. She was going to tell you it was for your retirement, for that Alaskan cruise you always talked about. But then Lisa's accident happened, and... A tear slipped down Ryan's cheek, then another. Not tears of betrayal now, but of a different realization. While he'd been suspecting his wife of the worst kind of deception, she'd been carrying an impossible burden alone. Protecting him at the cost of her own peace. Why didn't she tell me? Ryan's voice broke. She's been dealing with this by herself for 4 years? She tried, Ryan. That night after you came home from the hospital. You don't remember because of the medication, but you became so agitated the monitors went crazy. The doctors had to sedate you. Thomas leaned forward. Giselle made the choice that night to bear this alone, to give you a chance to recover. She never expected it would go on this long, but Lisa's condition has been complicated. Ryan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The weight of understanding pressed down on him, heavier than any suspicion had been. And the person in our house today, when I was in the attic? Probably Marianne, Lisa's nurse. She comes by sometimes to update Giselle on Lisa's progress. Giselle gives her a key when she's not going to be home. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so different from what Ryan had imagined that he could barely comprehend it. Not betrayal, but sacrifice. Not deception, but protection, born of love. I need to see her, Ryan said, standing abruptly. I need to see Lisa. Thomas nodded. Visiting hours end at 5 o'clock. I can take you. Ryan checked his watch. 3:30. There was just enough time. And Giselle, she's probably frantic looking for me. I'll call her. Tell her you know everything. Thomas's hand rested briefly on Ryan's shoulder. She's been carrying this alone for too long, old friend. As they walked to the door, Ryan paused. The letter. The one about the inheritance. If Harold died years ago, who sent it? Thomas's expression darkened. That's the other reason I wanted to see you. Someone's been trying to access the trust fund. Someone who knows about Lisa's condition and Giselle's efforts to keep it from you. He took the phone again, studying the letter. This signature is a forgery, a good one, but definitely fake. Who would do that? Ryan asked, a chill running through him. I don't know, Thomas admitted, but whoever it is knows your family well enough to exploit its most vulnerable secret. Ryan thought of the figure in the garden, the creaking floorboards when no one should have been home, the sense he'd had for weeks that something was wrong, but not in the way he'd imagined. I need to talk to Giselle, he said, a new urgency in his voice, before we go to Willowbrook. Thomas nodded, picking up his phone. I'll call her now. As Thomas dialed, Ryan moved to the window, looking out at the parking lot where rain still fell steadily. The world looked different now, clearer somehow, despite the weather. For days, he'd been drowning in suspicion and betrayal, seeing only what he feared most. And now, as understanding dawned, a new emotion took hold. Not relief exactly. The truth about Lisa was too painful for that. But something else, a fierce, protective resolve that straightened his shoulders and steadied his hands. Someone had tried to manipulate him, to turn him against Giselle when she was at her most vulnerable. Someone who knew their family intimately. And Ryan Thorne, retired account manager, husband of 40 years, father, was going to find out who. Ryan stood in the hallway of Willowbrook Rehabilitation Center, his heart hammering against his ribs. The walls were painted a soothing sage green, artwork hung at carefully measured intervals, an environment designed to calm, to heal. Yet he had never felt less calm in his life. Through the small window in the door before him, he could see Lisa, his daughter. Not in Chicago with her husband and the grandchild that never was, but here, just 30 minutes from the home he shared with Giselle. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, her frame thinner, but unmistakably his little girl. And beside her sat Giselle, holding their daughter's hand, talking with an animation that didn't reach her tired eyes. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked quietly beside him. Ryan clutched the visitor's badge he'd been given at reception. "I don't know what to say to her." "Just be her father," Thomas said. "That's all she needs right now. Trust shattered. Comment your fight, like for grit, follow for justice. What's his choice?" Ryan took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Giselle looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to alarm to something like relief. Lisa's reaction was slower, a gradual recognition that brightened her face. "Daddy?" she said, and the word nearly broke him. Her voice was the same as it had been when she was small, when she would run to him after a fall, seeking the comfort only he could provide. "Hi, sweetheart," he managed, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair. "I'm sorry I haven't visited sooner." Lisa's eyes flicked to Giselle, then back to Ryan. Confusion clouded her features. "But you've been sick. Mom said you couldn't travel." Ryan swallowed hard, looking at Giselle over their daughter's head. Her eyes were filled with tears and something else. Fear, perhaps. Fear of his reaction, his judgment. "I'm better now," he said, reaching for Lisa's other hand. "Much better." For the next 15 minutes, they sat together, a family reunited under circumstances none of them would have chosen. Lisa showed Ryan her art therapy projects, talked about her doctors, her progress. Beneath the surface of her words, Ryan sensed fragility, a wounded spirit still healing, but also strength. His daughter's resilience shone through her pain like light through stained glass. When the nurse came to tell them visiting hours were ending, Ryan felt he'd lived a lifetime in those brief minutes. The shock of seeing Lisa's condition, the reality of what his family had endured while he remained oblivious, it was almost too much to bear. "I'll bring your father back tomorrow," Giselle promised, kissing Lisa's forehead. "We'll have lunch together." In the hallway, after the door closed behind them, Ryan turned to Giselle. 4 years of secrets and sacrifice stood between them like a wall. "Why?" he asked simply. Giselle's composure finally broke. "You nearly died, Ryan. The doctors said any major shock could trigger another attack. When Lisa lost Mark and the baby, when she tried to—" Giselle stopped, unable to speak the words. "I couldn't risk losing you both." Ryan pulled her into his arms, feeling her shoulders shake with silent sobs. "So you carried it all, alone." "Thomas helped," she whispered against his chest. "And Dr. Feldman—" The trust fund was his idea, to make sure Lisa would always be taken care of, even if something happened to us. Ryan closed his eyes, remembering his suspicions, his accusations. Shame washed over him. "I thought— God, Giselle, I thought you were planning to leave me. That you'd been hiding money to start a new life once your father died." Giselle pulled back, wiping her eyes. "My father? Ryan? Dad died 10 years ago. Thomas told me." Ryan took her hands in his. "Someone sent me a letter, Giselle. A letter about your father's estate, with a forged signature. Someone who knows about Lisa, about the trust fund." Fear flickered across her face. "Who would do that?" "I don't know. But they've been in our house. I saw someone in the garden the night before last, and yesterday, when I found the documents in the attic, you went through my things?" Hurt replaced fear in her eyes. Ryan couldn't deny it. "I thought you were betraying me. The letter, the secret meetings, the hidden account, I didn't know what to think." Giselle's expression softened. "Oh, Ryan, if you'd asked me, would you have told me the truth, after hiding it for 4 years?" She looked away. "I don't know. Every time I considered telling you, I remembered that night in the hospital. How pale you looked, how the doctors rushed in when your heart rate spiked." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I couldn't risk it." Ryan felt a stab of guilt. His health had become the bars of a cage for his wife, trapping her in solitary burden-bearing. "I'm stronger than you think," he said gently. "Than the doctors think. I need to be your partner again, Giselle. In everything, including Lisa's care." Giselle nodded, fresh tears spilling. "I've missed that, being partners." Thomas, who had been keeping a respectful distance, approached. "We need to talk about the letter, about who might be trying to access the trust fund." Ryan nodded, his arm still around Giselle's shoulders. "I have a suspicion." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Martin Kelly." Giselle stiffened beside him. "Lisa's brother-in-law. Why would he—" "Because he was the beneficiary of Mark's life insurance policy, not Lisa," Ryan said grimly. "He expected to control that money after the accident, when he found out Lisa was still alive, still legally entitled to make decisions about her husband's estate. He was furious," Giselle finished. "He came to the hospital, demanded to speak to her doctors, said she wasn't competent to manage the funds." Thomas nodded slowly. "The trust was established with some of that insurance money. If Martin found out, He might try to create conflict between us, Ryan concluded. Turn husband against wife, hoping we'd be too distracted to notice him making a play for the trust. Giselle squeezed Ryan's hand. Well, what do we do? Ryan thought of the figure in their garden, the invasion of their home. His fear had transformed into something harder, more focused. We set a trap, he said, the decisive tone of his working years returning to his voice. Make him think his plan is working. Let him believe I've discovered your betrayal and left you. Thomas smiled slightly. The old Ryan Thorne is back. Ryan glanced at the closed door, behind which their daughter was healing from wounds he was only beginning to understand. Then at Giselle, who had sacrificed her own peace to protect his. No, he said quietly. Not the old Ryan. Someone new. Someone who knows what's worth fighting for. As they walked toward the exit, Ryan felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal he'd feared had been revealed as love in its purest, most sacrificial form. And the real threat, the true deception, was now squarely in his sights. For the first time since finding that forged letter, Ryan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Not because the situation was resolved, but because he was no longer facing it alone. He and Giselle were partners again, in grief, in healing, in justice. The community center buzzed with activity as seniors gathered for the annual Retirement Association dinner. Round tables dotted with flickering candles filled the hall, each place setting marked with elegant calligraphy. At the front, a podium stood ready for the evening's presentations. Ryan adjusted his tie, scanning the room. Everything looked normal, festive even, but beneath the surface of polite conversation and clinking glasses, a carefully orchestrated plan was unfolding. He's here, Giselle murmured, her hand finding Ryan's beneath the table. Back corner, blue tie. Ryan didn't turn immediately. Instead, he leaned toward his wife, smiling as if sharing a private joke. Only those closest to them would notice the tension in his shoulders, the vigilance in his eyes. Is Thomas in position? He asked quietly. Giselle nodded, taking a sip of water. With the attorney, near the bar. Detective Molina just arrived, too. She's by the entrance in the gray pantsuit. For a week, they had prepared. Bank records had been reviewed, security cameras installed, statements taken. What had begun as a desperate search for truth had evolved into a coordinated effort to expose a calculated deception. Martin Kelly looked much as Ryan remembered from Lisa and Mark's wedding 5 years earlier. Handsome in a polished way, with the confident air of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, working his way gradually toward the front of the room, toward Ryan and Giselle. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. Martin's voice carried just the right note of surprise and pleasure. I didn't expect to see you both here tonight. Ryan stood, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Martin, it's been too long. Indeed it has. Martin's gaze flickered between them, a momentary confusion crossing his features. According to the information that had been strategically leaked, Ryan had moved out 3 days ago after discovering Giselle's betrayal. Giselle rose as well, her expression carefully neutral. How are you, Martin? We were so sorry to hear about your investment troubles. A flash of irritation crossed Martin's face before his smile reasserted itself. Just a temporary setback. In fact, I've been exploring some new opportunities lately. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Actually, I've been meaning to call you both. There's something about Mark's estate I think we should discuss. What a coincidence, Ryan said, gesturing to an empty chair at their table. We were hoping to discuss that very topic with you tonight. Martin's smile faltered slightly as he took the offered seat. Oh? Yes, Giselle said. her voice steady despite the emotion Ryan knew she must be feeling. "It concerns Lisa's trust fund." Martin's expression remained neutral, but Ryan noticed his fingers tighten around his water glass. "I wasn't aware Lisa had a trust fund." "Weren't you?" Ryan asked mildly. "That's strange, considering you forged a letter from Giselle's deceased father attempting to manipulate me into believing she was hiding money from an inheritance." The color drained from Martin's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Giselle said. "Just like you knew exactly where to find the documents in our attic. Just like you knew Ryan had a history of heart trouble that made him vulnerable to emotional manipulation." Martin's eyes darted toward the exit. "This is absurd." "I haven't been anywhere near your house." "We have footage that says otherwise," Ryan replied, sliding a tablet across the table. On the screen, security camera images clearly showed Martin entering their back garden 3 nights earlier. "That could be anyone," Martin protested, but his voice had lost its confidence. "We also have records of your attempts to access the trust account," Ryan continued, as if Martin hadn't spoken. 3 separate attempts using Lisa's personal information you could only have obtained by going through her belongings after the accident. Martin pushed back from the table. "I don't have to listen to these accusations." "Actually, you do." The new voice belonged to Detective Molina, who had approached silently during their conversation. She placed a hand on Martin's shoulder, firmly guiding him back into his seat. "Mr. Kelly, I'd like you to accompany me to answer some questions regarding attempted fraud, breaking and entering, and forgery." "This is ridiculous," Martin hissed, but his bravado was crumbling. "Mark was my brother. I have rights to—" "You have no rights to Lisa's trust," Thomas interrupted, joining them with a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit. "As her husband's brother, you have no legal claim whatsoever to funds established for her care. Mr. Porter here," he nodded to the attorney beside him, "has prepared a full brief on the matter." Martin's gaze darted between them, the realization of his position slowly dawning. "You set me up." "No, Martin," Ryan said quietly. "You did that yourself when you tried to tear apart my family." As Detective Molina led Martin away, the dinner continued around them, most attendees unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Ryan reached for Giselle's hand, finding it trembling slightly despite her composed expression. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Giselle took a deep breath. "I just keep thinking about Lisa, all these years of protecting her, helping her heal, and he was willing to destroy everything for money." "Not everything," Ryan corrected gently. "Not us." Thomas rejoined them, settling into the chair Martin had vacated. "Porter says the case is solid. Breaking and entering, forgery, attempted fraud. Martin will face serious consequences." "And the trust?" Giselle asked anxiously. "Completely secure," Thomas assured her. In fact, Porter suggested adding some additional protections given the circumstances. Ryan nodded, relief washing over him. The fear and suspicion that had consumed him just days ago seemed distant now, replaced by a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The association president approached the podium, tapping the microphone to begin the evening's program. Around them, conversations quieted as attention turned toward the front. "Before we begin our official presentations," the president announced, "I'd like to acknowledge someone who exemplifies the values our association stands for. Someone whose integrity, wisdom, and dedication to family remind us what truly matters in our golden years." He smiled warmly. "Giselle Thorne, would you please join me?" Surprise crossed Giselle's face as applause filled the room. Ryan squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Go on," he whispered. This wasn't part of the plan, but you deserve it." Giselle rose uncertainly, making her way to the podium. The president handed her a small plaque, leaning in to explain something that made her eyes widen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Giselle began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "I'm honored, but this recognition belongs to my entire family, to my husband Ryan, whose strength I've always relied on, even when he didn't know it." Their eyes met across the room, and Ryan felt tears build. "To my daughter, who teaches me daily about courage and resilience, and to friends like Thomas, who stand by us through life's darkest moments." She paused, composing herself. "Someone recently tried to convince my husband that I had betrayed him, that 40 years of marriage was built on deception." A murmur ran through the audience. What that person didn't understand is that love, real love, isn't just about the vows we make when everything is perfect. It's about the promises we keep when everything falls apart. Ryan couldn't stop the tears now. They rolled down his cheeks unashamedly as Giselle continued. "The plaque says, 'For outstanding service to families in crisis.' But I didn't serve alone. We all face crises in our lives. The question isn't whether they'll come, but who will stand beside us when they do." She looked directly at Ryan. "I'm blessed to know the answer." As Giselle returned to their table, amid enthusiastic applause, Ryan stood to embrace her. In that moment, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had no idea of the drama they'd just weathered, he understood something profound about the marriage they'd built. It wasn't perfect. It had bent under pressure, nearly broken under deception, but at its core was a resilience neither time nor tragedy could diminish. A partnership strong enough to withstand both external threats and internal doubts. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." She completed their long-standing exchange, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. As they sat down to dinner, Martin's threats neutralized and Lisa's future secured, Ryan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the complacent ease of ignorance, but the hard-won tranquility that comes from facing truth and finding it ultimately on your side. The betrayal he had feared had been revealed as protection. The deception he had discovered had been born of love, and the truth, complex, painful, but ultimately healing, had set them both free to begin again. Together. Twilight settled over the garden, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of lavender and amber. Ryan sat on the porch swing, its familiar creak a comfort as he gently pushed with one foot. Beside him, Giselle curled against his side, a light throw blanket draped across their laps against the evening chill. "Do you think she's ready?" Giselle asked, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. Ryan considered the question, watching fireflies begin their nightly dance among the rose bushes. "Dr. Feldman seems to think so, and Lisa herself asked about coming home for Sunday dinner." "Just dinner," Giselle clarified. "Not staying overnight yet." "One step at a time," Ryan agreed. His hand found Giselle's, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of 40 years. "We'll set the table with the good china. Make her favorite pot roast. And apple pie," Giselle added, "with ice cream the way she always liked it." The swing rocked gently as they sat in companionable silence, watching darkness claim the garden inch by inch. So much had changed in the 3 weeks since the confrontation with Martin. The initial police investigation had expanded to include financial fraud spanning several years. Mark's parents had reached out, apologizing for their absence and asking to reconnect with Lisa. Most significantly, Lisa had begun to talk more openly about her trauma, her grief, the first step in what Dr. Feldman called authentic healing. "I've been thinking," Ryan said eventually, "about renovating the downstairs guest room, making it into a proper bedroom with an attached bath, for when Lisa is ready to spend more time here." Giselle looked up at him, eyes shining in the dim porch light. "You think she might live with us again someday?" "Maybe. Or maybe just stay weekends at first." Ryan squeezed her hand. "I want her to have the option, to know that her home is still here whenever she's ready." "I'd like that," Giselle whispered, "to have her close again." Ryan nodded, feeling the rightness of it settle in his chest. After the turmoil of recent weeks, each decision now seemed clearer, guided by what truly mattered rather than fear or suspicion. The porch light cast a gentle glow over the family photos Giselle had arranged on the small table beside them, images spanning decades of shared life. Their wedding day, Lisa's graduation, holidays, anniversaries, ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. Ryan picked up the newest edition, a photo taken just days ago at Willowbrook. Lisa between her parents, all three smiling. Not the carefree smiles of earlier pictures, perhaps, but something more profound. Smiles that acknowledged pain, yet chose joy anyway. "We made it through," Ryan said, returning the photo to its place. "Did you ever doubt we would?" Giselle asked, a note of vulnerability in her question. Ryan considered lying, offering the comfort of certainty, but their relationship had weathered too much deception, even well-intentioned, to withstand more. "Yes," he admitted. "When I found that letter, when I thought you'd been hiding things all these years, I doubted everything." Giselle nodded, accepting his honesty without judgment. "And now? Now I understand what true betrayal would have been." Ryan turned to face her fully. "It would have been me giving up on us without fighting for the truth. It would have been you continuing to carry impossible burdens alone rather than risking my health." "We both made mistakes," Giselle said softly. "Born of love," Ryan completed. "That makes all the difference." From inside the house came the chime of the grandfather clock, 9 soft notes marking the hour. Stars had emerged fully now, scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on dark cloth. "Remember how we used to sit out here when Lisa was small?" Giselle asked, "watching the stars after she went to bed?" Ryan smiled at the memory. "You used to point out constellations, make up stories about them." "And you'd fall asleep before I finished," Giselle teased gently. "Not asleep," Ryan protested. "Just resting my eyes." Their laughter mingled in the night air, a sound that had been too rare in their home these past years. Ryan savored it, recognizing its healing power. "I want to show you something," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, its blue surface faded with age. Giselle's eyes widened in recognition. "My earrings, the ones my grandmother gave me." Ryan nodded. "I found them in the attic that day, looking for evidence of things that weren't there." He opened the box, revealing 2 small pearl earrings nestled in faded satin. "I thought perhaps, for our anniversary next month—" "Yes," Giselle said, touching the pearls reverently. "I'd like that very much." Ryan closed the box, returning it to his pocket for safekeeping. 41 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday we were standing at that altar. And sometimes, Giselle added with a small smile, it feels like we've lived several lifetimes together. "All of them worth it," Ryan said, drawing her closer. The swing creaked softly as they rocked, 2 figures silhouetted against the warm light spilling from their home. Above them, stars continued their ancient patterns, unchanging despite the human dramas unfolding beneath their distant light. In the morning, there would be preparations to make. Calls to Dr. Feldman about Lisa's visit. Renovation plans to discuss. Perhaps even a conversation about that Alaskan cruise they'd postponed for so long. But for now, there was just this, the comfort of familiar arms, the gentle rhythm of the swing, the knowledge that what they had built together had weathered its greatest test and emerged stronger. Ryan closed his eyes, not sleeping, but simply being present in this moment of hard-won peace. The betrayal he had feared had never existed. The deception he had discovered had been protection in disguise. And the truth, complex and painful though it was, had ultimately set them free. "I'm back," he whispered, echoing words he'd once imagined saying in anger, but now spoke in gratitude. Giselle understood, as she always had. "We both are," she replied, her hand finding his in the darkness. Finally. The porch swing continued its gentle motion, carrying them forward together into whatever the next chapter might hold. Folks, we've all held that piece of paper that changed everything, haven't we? Sat there in a favorite chair, maybe with coffee gone cold beside us, while the words on the page turned our world sideways. Trust is like that old oak table in your dining room, solid and dependable until, suddenly, it isn't. You've felt that first tear well up, that first crack in your certainty, just like Ryan did when he found that letter. It's a special kind of hurt, betrayal is. Cuts deeper when you've lived 6 decades or more, doesn't it? After all those years of building something, of thinking you knew every creak in the floorboards of your relationship, the nights you lie awake, wondering how you missed the signs, the mornings you catch yourself in the mirror, asking that gray-haired stranger when exactly you became so blind. We've all been there, darlin', questioning if everything we believed was just a story we told ourselves. But here's what I've learned, watching stories like Ryan's unfold. That same wisdom folks dismiss as set in your ways is actually your greatest strength. Those patterns you recognize from decades of living. That gut feeling that says, wait now, something ain't right here. The patience to sit with uncertainty until truth reveals itself. These aren't weaknesses of age, they're its greatest gifts. Remember how Ryan used his account manager's eye to spot what others missed. How his life experience helped him find the real betrayal hiding behind the false one. That's the power you carry too, earned through every gray hair and laugh line. And dignity. Lord, how precious that becomes as the years pass. The ability to stand tall after your knees have buckled with grief. To wipe those tears and face whatever truth waits on the other side. To rebuild, even when the foundation seems cracked beyond repair. There's something beautiful about that kind of resilience, isn't there? Something that only shows up after you've weathered a few storms. Most days, I sit on my porch swing, watching the evening settle in, much like Ryan and Giselle do now. The creak of the chains, the whisper of breeze through leaves that have seen countless seasons change. And I think about how we're not so different from those old trees, battered sometimes, bent perhaps, but still standing, still reaching for the light. Whatever letter life has handed you, whatever betrayal has left its mark on your heart, remember this: the story doesn't end with the tears. It continues with the choice to rise, to seek truth, to believe in love again, perhaps not with blind faith, but with the clear-eyed wisdom that only comes from having lived a life worth fighting for.